as I said, the conversation two VIS we lead conversation series on with Nitin Sridhar. So a short introduction to both we lead and VIS as we begin. And we lead, or the Vivekananda Institute for Leadership Development, is an initiative of the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement. We lead's mission is developing human and social capital for nation building by enhancing the potential of individuals and institutions across the development sector. VLEAD engages across four sectors: the government, NGOs, corporate, youth, and community. The Vivekananda Institute of Indian Studies, VIIS, a unit of the, again, another unit of the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, is focused on introducing India and Indianness across the globe. VIIS offers customized programs for university students across the globe, in addition to being a single window for volunteers, medical students, teachers, and interns interested in associating with, with a variety of programs that are conducted under the aegis of SVYM. VIS also creates platforms for comparative and cross-cultural learning and facilitates students across the globe to get an Indian experience through exposure to Indian culture, spirituality, arts, music, and yoga. Today's speaker, Nitin Sridhar, in addition to being an author, speaker, and journalist based in, both of us live in the same city, Mysuru. And in addition to all of this, is also a good friend, and has been quite instrumental in inspiring quite a lot of the things that I've started doing recently. Trained as a civil engineer and having worked in the construction field, his passion for culture and philosophy made him take a career change into journalism. He's currently the editor of India Facts and also the chief curator of the Advaita Academy. His first book, Musings on Hinduism, provided an overview of various aspects of Hindu philosophy and society. That was followed by Menstruation Across Cultures, a historical perspective that incidentally came out at a very crucial time, particularly when the Sabrimala verdict was in the court, and there was several issues surrounding that. And that book examines the menstruation notions and practices prevalent not just in India but across cultures and religions from across the world. Nitin regularly writes columns on issues spanning politics, society, religion, and philosophy. A pleasure to have you, Nitin.
Thank you for inviting me, Ramesh.
Yeah. So, Nitin, since we are going to have this as a conversation, I'll start with the question that most of us struggled with right at the beginning of putting this together. You know, uh, I'll be going back and forth as there are quite a few people who need to be admitted into the waiting room. So I'll do that as well. Like I was saying, right at the beginning, we had this issue of how do we frame this entire, conversation that we're going to have. Right in the title, we've said dharma and ethical duties, but both of us agreed that, that's a very poor uh, alternative to using, instead of dharma. So that is one thing. So I want to start with the difficulty of defining dharma in a language, because dharma is an all-encompassing concept. It applies at the level of the individual, at the level of the collective, at the level of the universe, at the level of the cosmos. Whereas ethical duties, as to a large extent, primarily at an individual level. So I think if we could start by framing this conversation in terms of what exactly is dharma, and maybe we could go back and forth as well, and then look at this in terms of not just the difficulty. I mean, you've spent an entire book explaining dharma itself. That itself shows how difficult it is to use the English language to communicate that. So that's something that we can start with, Nitin.
Yeah, dharma is a term, and it forget about translating into other languages. It is something which is very difficult to, capture it, even in any of the Indian languages, even in Sanskrit. I mean, if it were so easy, so, then a lot of literature, lot of text concentrating on what dharma is. You will have an entire tradition of dharma shastras that would not have been required, right? So,
Yeah.
so it's a very wide concept. It is perhaps one of the very central tenets, the very central um, core principles of Sanatan Dharma, core principle of Indian civilization. What makes our civilization what it is today? I mean, what makes it different and distinct from other civilizations across the world? So it is not that ethical principles are not there child ethics and all those things. So dharma is not definitely just ethics, and in a very limited context, as you said, it can be considered as ethical principles. So, so in my book, I start with, for this reason, uh, giving a workable definition of dharma, because it is uh, almost impossible to give a complete definition of dharma, so to speak, because it is very vast. I think in the Mahabharata, it was Bhishma who said, the dharma is subtle than the subtlest, and it's very difficult to know. It's very difficult to capture. So in the book, I give some of the definitions that we find in our own shastras, which are workable. For example, if you take the etymological meaning, dharma comes from the dhatu, which means to uphold, to sustain,
Yeah. So,
and we have.
yeah, sorry, Nitin. When you say workable, I think what you mean is that because I think one of the questions that came, and therefore I'll also ask, is when you say workable, are you saying how do we bring it into practice on a daily basis? Is that what you're saying, workable,
No,
or yeah?
yeah. What I mean by workable definition is, it is, it is impossible to start our journey by having a complete knowledge at the beginning itself. So we need to begin somewhere. I mean, if we have to understand dharma, then we have to begin somewhere. So this somewhere is a kind of a workable definition in the sense that we have some understanding of dharma from which we enter into this whole worldview that of which the dharma forms the core principle. So by workable, I simply mean something which gives a basic understanding of what dharma is. And so I want to point out this basic meaning in the meaning of the term itself. It comes from the dhatu, which means to sustain, to uphold. So, and we have this scriptural references, which is dharana, dharma iti ahu. So, dharma is that which upholds. And we have so many references. I would read some of them, which we have in the text. This comes from Mahabharata. I just quoted. Dharana dharma mityaho dharmo dharayate prajam. Now, dharma is that which upholds. Dharma sustains all beings. Praja means all beings. It's not just human beings. It's all beings, all objects, everything in the universe. And similarly, we have similar definitions in Upanishads, the Shruti, like Mahanarayana Upanishad, which speaks about dharmo vishwasya pratishtha, the dharme sarvam pratishtitam, tasmat dharmam paramam vadanti. So, so many definitions, and these provide us key points. So this Mahanarayana Upanishad gives 3 points. One is dharma pratishtha, it upholds, it establishes, it supports everything. And it also says dharma is that which frees one from our acts of demerits or adharmic acts, or what we can, for the lack of proper terms in English, the acts of sins. So sin is a very Christianly loaded concept, and it has a particular meaning in Western culture, in Christian theology. I am not using it in that sense. I'm merely trying to translate what we consider as, papa or adharma, right? The
Yeah.
unethical actions. So the key point is, so some of the very core aspect of dharma is that it is something which helps sustain the universe. It is something which helps sustain the individual. It is the sustain, that the term sustain is the core aspect of dharma at both the cosmic level as well as the individual level. So corollary, it's at every level, the social level, individual level, family level, nations level, and even a ecological level, and cosmic level. So to sustain is the key thing. And then this is the overall kind of the bird's eye view of dharma from a cosmic perspective. So then you spoke about practical things. So from the universal, if we have to come to an individual, then we have another definition, in a different text. This is from Vaisheshika Sutras, which says, Yato abhyudaya nishreyasa siddhi sa dharma. Now, dharma is that which leads to abhyudaya, material welfare, and nishreyasa, spiritual upliftment. That is, that which gives us overall well-being. So, all those actions which leads to overall well-being of a person. So now we are speaking about a person here. All actions that I do that leads me to overall well-being, that is dharma. And those actions which eventually lead me to uh, suffering, that is adharma. So it is from this perspective, then we further contextualize it and bring it to the level of what we translated as, samanya dharma as ethical duties. I would add that dharma we need to has a different layers. It's not just ethics as you said, rightly
Yeah.
said. Only one aspect of dharma, which is called as samanya dharma. Samanya dharma is the principles that are common to everybody, the duties that are common to everybody. What are these duties? These are ethical duties. So ethical principles like speaking truth or not causing harm, etc. They are not just optional. They are not just something
Okay.
we can do
Nitin,
whatever.
I'll come. Nitin, I'll come to the this one that you're talking about in terms of what are the, because I think you just jumped ahead in terms of what, because the moment you said about the about wealth, earning wealth, I think one of the key aspects which is consistently been part of, for example, you brought in the Western concept of how that there are very very stark lines that divide what is right versus wrong. So this is here there is, here it is a very blurred line between what is right and what is wrong. For example, since you brought in that, I think it might be ideal to bring in the question of the Purusharthas, which you also discuss in your book. With and I for example have seen it exactly like dharma at one end and moksha at the other, with artha and kama in between. The idea being that it has the dharma circumscribes both the acquisition of artha as well as the fulfillment of uh, kama, which could be both sensual as well as sexual, as we know all know. So there is that, for example, the absolute taboo that is there with regard to kama, or for example the artha, which is the earning of wealth or whatever, is not seen within the dharmic ecosystem, where it is perfectly all right for you to make all genuine efforts to earn wealth for yourself as well as for the benefit of the society, for the ecosystem in which you live. And also it is perfectly all right for you to fulfill genuine sensual as well as sexual desires, which are all part of the whole aspect of one being not just a human but also being a part of this entire creation. Whereas, but that being circumscribed by the aspect of dharma, I think that also you brought out quite extensively in the chapter, I think the second chapter if I'm not right, where you talk about this as well. So maybe we could also look at that, because I think there is there's a fair amount of confusion in how in terms of how to define the purusharthas, and also bring it down not just to the level of the individual but also to the level of the collective. The purusharthas are also at a I mean governance and policy, and those things are also in fact if you look at the government or you look at a ruler and everything, all that also it changes. So it is very contextual, framed very contextually at all levels. So perhaps we could
Yes,
discuss. Yeah.
yes, definitely, Ramesh. Uh, I was speaking in response to your first question
Mm.
about foundational blocks of Sanatana Dharma.
Right.
Dharma as a foundational block, but it is Dharma not in isolation, which is a foundational block. Dharma forms a very important part of the Purushartha, Chaturvida Purushartha, the
Mm.
fourfold Purushartha, and it is this we have these foundation blocks. The Purushartha Drishti, and we have many other foundational blocks which defines how we look at our life. Uh, Before addressing the specific question, I would like to highlight why these foundational blocks are very important. Uh, One example is in the present times, we have this huge ecological crisis. And one of the most important reason for this ecological crisis is um keeping man or the human being at the center first, and then uh, considering not at all focusing on the responsibility of a person, but rather keeping him at the center in the sense that it is for the fulfillment of his greed that the entire universe exists. So this anthropocentricity, which focuses, which kind of means that the whole world is at the feet of the men for them to explore, for them to exploit for their benefits. And this is at the heart of the modernity, at the heart of the technological revolution and everything else. And this has caused immense damage. But contrary to that, if we come to Indian civilization and the Hindu, the Shastras or the worldview as a whole, we have one example is if you take a text like Manusmriti or even a Mahabharata, the discourses almost even the Purana, the discourses almost always begins with a description of a Srishti. We have the Srishti Kanda, the whole cosmology, how it is manifested and how different kinds of beings are manifested, and humans are just one of them. So we are not the center of the manifestation, we are not the center of the creation, we are not the center of the universe. We are one among the many beings there. We have our rightful place, but we are not everything. Our life purpose is a quest to unveil the reality of our self, reality of Brahman, reality of the universe. But it's diametrically opposite to anthropocentricity. So these things are is what I call as foundational blocks of our worldview, and it is in this context we have this Purusharth Drishti. Because after understanding that humans are one aspect of the whole universe and not the center of the universe per se, then we need to understand how or what is the importance of human life. So, on one side, it is saying that humans are not the center, but at the other side, they are also saying that human life is valuable. Why it is valuable, how it is valuable, and how can we make it valuable? Then we are given this framework of understanding human life as Purusharthas. Purusha Artha, the goals or the meanings of of a person. What are the meanings? What brings meaning to human life? So the central question is, everybody of us wants to be happy, right? So the logic goes that everybody wants to be happy and nobody wants to be sad. So this leads us to pursuit of desires, and it may be a desire for a worldly objects, worldly pleasures. It may be desire for a family. It may be desire for money or car, whatever it is. And then there is the kama. After kama, there is artha. It is a pursuit of prosperity. It is pursuit of like security, financial security, or as a whole material security. And then we have also pursuit of virtue, which is dharma. And then the ultimate pursuit, the pursuit of liberation, pursuit of which is to free oneself from this whole cycle of birth, death, right? So that is moksha. So these four goals, it's not that we have only four desires in life, but the framework is we can kind of arrange all our desires, whatever it is, using these frameworks. We can analyze them, we can place them, we can relatively create a system. So in this, I always wondered, many years back when I first became familiar with Purusharthas, why is it that dharma comes first? Why we say dharma, artha, kama, moksha? Considering that we say kama should be the lowest or it should be, the least important, we should say kama, artha, dharma, moksha, right? So that sounds logical. But later I realized there is a very important reason. As you were saying, on one end we have dharma and on the other end we have moksha. In between we have artha and kama. The reason is dharma is a principle which connects the artha and kama on one hand and moksha on the other hand. I work hard to earn that money. I can
I
getting
think you might have
proper
to,
business or
uh,
employment.
Nitin, you froze for a minute, for a second. So you might have to repeat yourself.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
just that.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was saying, take an example. There is a person who wants to earn a lot of money, and he can earn it by hard work, by taking up a legitimate business or a job or whatever it is. Or he may say, let me earn it quickly, let me rob a bank, right? So in both cases, he is actually pursuing artha. He is actually pursuing kama and artha. However, in the first case, he is trying to fulfill his desires in a ethical manner. So that is why the ethics is a very important aspect of dharma as far as an individual action is concerned. So in the first case, there is his pursuit is ethically through ethical means. In the second case, the robbing of the bank is unethical means. So if he gets caught while robbing a bank, he will go to jail. So there is a suffering there. But there is no such suffering attached to this ethical pursuit. I'm just giving a very simple example. So, the pursuit of kama and artha in a very isolated manner will leads to a lot of recklessness, and it will ultimately, in one way or the other, it eventually leads to suffering of an individual in some or the other manner. So, and it will take away from more and more far away from moksha. So that because it increases the bondage to this whole samsara. So what the Shastra says, you pursue your desires for worldly pleasures, but you pursue it ethically, such that slowly you come to a stage where you can slowly become satisfied with whatever you have in material life, and then turn your mind towards the spiritual journey. So dharma is the link which helps an individual to travel from a pursuit of pleasure to a pursuit of knowledge, pursuit of liberation. So it is the
Uh,
key factor.
yeah, an associated question from a common friend, a common Facebook friend. So he's messaged me just now. So I'll ask that. I think. So are you people? You saying? Do we also discuss the the key content differences? I think we briefly touched upon it right at the beginning in terms of the Western understanding, the Western context in which the Western framing of ethics, sin, truth, duty, and all of that as part of Western philosophy, which is in a sense structured as in structured in stone. I mean, there it's not something that can change, but here it is very contextually and very flexibly defined. For example, even if you look at the idea of ahimsa, for example, which I wanted to discuss much later, but I brought it here itself since this question is being framed, is that it's not something. For example, one of the key issues that we seem to be facing is that ahimsa essentially means that the whole idea is that you will not cause harm for your own sadistic pleasure of something, but that does not mean that you will still stand and practice ahimsa in the face of even at the cost of not protecting yourself, your family, or the society, or your country. I mean, the whole idea. So in that sense, the whole idea of the truth, or for example ahimsa, or concepts like that, are completely different and very contextually framed in our case, as opposed to the Western idea of all of these things. I think that is one thing that I wanted to bring in, given the question that has been framed. Also the question also looking at what are the key differences between the ethics, the morality, morality of sexuality, morality of sensuality. All of that has also come in. So thought I'll frame that as well right away. So
Yeah. So
I think you bring
uh,
it up in a much later chapter. Since I've read the book where you talk about essentially about ahimsa and how it needs to be contextually framed also. So that's yeah.
yes. As regarding Western theories versus Indian perspective, see, I would not go much into the West because they have their own lot of different schools. Their deontology and other ethics, and some consider it as So it takes more kind of detailed discussion, and that is not my forte. But yes, if I have to very superficially at the very outset, I have to compare and make a difference. it does come across, especially the Christian theology, the understanding of ethics. I mean, the commandments and all. Uh, it lacks this context. It is more written in a stone kind of approach. However, I would like to add that today there is a phenomenon which some people say that anything goes in Hindu Dharma. There are no set rules. There are no proper, whatever we have a lot of choice. We can do whatever we want. So this is the other extreme. Considering that the other religions are set in stone, but we have nothing.
Yeah.
Everything is in the sand. But this is not true. That this is deeply problematic because uh, I think I will bring it this point about we'll discuss about how do we know what is dharma and adharma, the pramanas, right? So I would keep that to the later aspect, but I would just add here that it is not that we have nothing written, we have nothing in concrete. We have our methodology, we have a fixed methodology to knowing what is what. So we have the eternal principles, which are eternal by the definition, and we have the flexibility in terms of application. So here I will address the question you spoke about ahimsa. And it's not just limited to ahimsa, it could be any ethical
Absolutely.
principle. It
Yeah.
could be about satya also. So one example, I'll speak about satya first. I'll give an example. It's a story, our tradition uses anecdotes and stories to make a key difference, make a key point. Speaking truth is satya, yes. And the Shastra clearly say that our speech, our thought, and our action should be in sync, and that is satya. However, our life situations may be much more complicated than this. For example, let us consider an example. Somebody is sitting under somewhere, a beggar is sitting outside a temple, for example. And, somebody comes who is, robber. He robs something, and he runs and comes and just hides behind the temple. And he tells the beggar not to tell anyone. But of course, the beggar knows that this person has robbed something because he saw him, taking some jewels in his hand. And after 5 minutes, a police comes, right? In this case, the who has taken a vow that I will always speak the truth. He speaks the truth. See, the robber is there, and the police catch him, right? So this is okay. He has spoken the truth. There is no issue. But just make it a little bit changes in the story. Instead of a robber, consider that there was a person who was being persecuted by some, the rowdy elements. He was beaten up, and he somehow uh, saved his life, and he was running, and he went and hid behind the temple. Now these rowdy elements come to this beggar and ask him, did you see anyone running? So now the question is, should he speak truth that this victim is hiding behind the temple because he has taken a vow of truth, right? Or should he not speak the truth? In this case, in case he says true in a very literal sense, it is actually adharma because he is causing violence, himsa, to an innocent person by speaking such a truth. So in this case, speaking truth in a literal sense does not constitute the practice of satya as a dharmic principle. So here, the dharmic action, if he has to do something dharmically, then such a beggar has only two options. Either he stays silent, or he misleads the rowdy elements by saying that he has gone somewhere else or something like that, right? So this is very important. In fact, we have verses in the text itself which says Satyam Vada, Priyam Vada, Apriya Satyam Navada, Priya Anrutam Navada. That is, Speak truth, but also speak pleasant. Don't speak unpleasant truths, and also don't speak pleasant untruths. So this is a kind of contextualization of a eternal principle. When I say eternal principle, it cannot be that Satya Ahimsa uh, was a ethical ideal to be followed 10,000 years back, but it is not so today. No, speaking falsehood can never be an ethical ideal. It can never be a dharmic principle. It is always Satya that is dharmic principle. However, in application, we have to take into account the Desha, Kala, Patra, and all the contexts that happens. And second part of your question was, I think, on the question of karma, right? That you asked two times. This is a very my thesis in for my masters that I am doing is on karma as a purushartha, and this is a very interesting topic because uh, I think we have been very superficial in our understanding of karma as a purushartha. You know, because the name karma comes to mind, you know, a very famous brand of contraceptives. The name Kama comes to mind only sexuality, sensuality, all those things. But and of course we have this Kama Sutra text which has been completely bad mouthed, completely turned into some kind of sexual posturing manual. But do you know in the very first chapter, Vatsyayana begins his text by saying Dharma Artha Kamebhyo Namaha. So he salutes Dharma, Artha, Kama, all the three of them in his text, very opening. That is, he places Kama within the framework of Purushartha. And Kama has many meanings. At the very heart, it means desire. And then also the other meaning is the fruit of such a desire, which is pleasure. So, legitimately speaking, it need not be worldly pleasures alone, it could be any pleasure. However, mostly in our conventional framework of Purusharthas, we keep Kama limited to worldly pleasures. And we need to understand that a kind of taboo, a kind of shame, a kind of um, restrictive kind of that is attached today to pursuit of karma. It's a very recent phenomenon. It's not more than 200, 300 years old, which we have inherited from Victorian mentality, the Victorian colonialist thinking. Because in our own tradition, karma has a very rightful place as a purushartha, as a legitimate pursuit of life. However, it is a pursuit which should be pursued in a what in a responsible sense. That is the only thing. You pursue the karma, you pursue artha in a responsible way and not in a reckless way. That is all. Otherwise, such a pursuit is valid, such a pursuit is legitimate, and we as individuals as humans, we take birth because of our desires for worldly pleasures, because of our previous vasanas and karmas and etc. You cannot simply negate them. You cannot become free of it by negating them. In fact, by suppressing them, it leads to further perversions. You know, one example I would like to give. We have this lot of sex scandals in the Christian church, the pastors and all. It's there is nothing. This is a worldwide phenomenon now. It's everybody knows about it. I mean, why is it happening? Because there is a repression of these sexual desires in the Christian theology, because it is considered as sinful and all those things. But we do not have any such concepts. We do not have any such repression. What instead is taught, that we have this ashrama system, along with the Purushartha framework, we have the Varnashrama framework, right? So in the ashrama framework, we have the four ashramas of Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyasa. In the Brahmacharya ashrama, what is taught is actually not celibacy. What is taught is actually Indriya Nigraha. how to keep your senses in a check, how to restrain your senses. And then when you enter the Grihastha Ashrama Dharma, there through such a self-control, you pursue the Dharma Artha Kama in a controlled manner, in a
And
restrained manner.
yeah, and also the fact of the whole idea being that I think Sri Aurobindo talks about this, where he says the while there was a phase when most of these and Vivekananda also talks about it, in the sense that unless you have a grahastha dharma, how do you ensure that those who have to legitimately work out their karma, those who have passed on have to come back and work out their karma in this karma bhumi or whatever, in the earth or whatever. How will you there has to be a medium of two people who have to actually deliver these people into to earth to finish that. So it's also connected to the whole concept of the uh, karmic cycle of birth and rebirth itself. So unless you have a grastha ashrama dharma. But Swami Vivekananda also makes the point that for some the quantum leap, like he calls it the quantum leap is possible when the call comes. That is, you can go straight from brahmacharya to sannyasa, for example. It's not necessary that everybody goes through it, but those who need this gradual dharma, where they have to go through a stage of brahmacharya, grahastha, vanaprastha, which doesn't exist at all now. Everybody is a grahastha today. Then the sannyasa, and then probably sannyasa. So that so that there is a provision for both the quantum leap, as Vivekananda calls it, and also this gradual progression from one stage to another. I think that also is
Yes, yes, definitely. The greatness of Grihastha Dharma is upheld even very old texts like Manusmriti, which says the Grihastha Dharma sustains the entire society. All other ashramas are sustained by Grihastha because it is a family which sustains the children, the brahmacharyas. It is the family that sustains even the sannyasis who have left everything, who have no belongings,
absolutely.
right? Even a sannyasi cannot even cook. So who will feed him? It is the grihastha who feeds him, right? So who feeds the brahmacharis? It's the grihastha who feeds
It's a
them.
grahastha does it, absolutely.
Who feeds the birds and cows and all the living beings? It's the grihastha who does it. So this is the reason the Pancha Mahayagyas of the grihastha has gained huge
Absolutely.
importance in the Hindu thought, in the Hindu worldview, that grihastha is bound by five duties, everyday duties, the Pancha Mahayagyas. The Shastra says these Pancha Mahayagyas is greater than all the physical yagyas which you do. And what are these? These include, serving of these animals and maintaining the ecology, serving the guests, and studying, and all the runas that we have, the Pitra runa, the Rishi runa, and the Devata runa. So the whole universe is sustained by a grihastha, because by fulfilling this runa is upholding all of them: the rishis, the devatas, the pitrus, the bhutas, and the manushyas. Everything is in this sense a grihastha. Just see this beauty of it. This perspective holds a grihastha, a human being, at the center of the universe, but not in an anthropocentric way of greed, that whole universe exists for his fulfillment of his greed. Instead, it places him in the center of the universe in the sense that he owes a rina, a debt to the whole universe, and he has to fulfill it by upholding the universe, by facilitating the survival of the universe, the abhyudaya of the universe. See what beautifully this is
I mean,
something.
he's only part of the great web of creation, Indra's net, kind
Yes.
of, one node in that net. And interestingly, we are also talking over the world wide web now. So so yeah, here I think I will also try to bring in can you hear me, Nitin?
Yeah. Tell me.
Yeah, the one of the concepts that you bring out very well is the concept of the whole idea of satya manifesting in speech in your chapter, the dharma manifesting in the actual practice of it, and then and all of these, and I see it as, and it's through practice and through the manifestation of speech. And then rita, which is interestingly, the word rita has multiple usages in English. Rhythm comes from it, ritual comes from it, vrata comes from it, and all of these words draw from, essentially, is about the thought. And I see it as, essential rita required for maintaining the harmony that is required at an individual as well as a societal level. And when we look at most of the things that we do, be it the Panchamahayagnyas, or the pujas, or the whatever the nitya karmas that we talk about, all of these are essentially to build up that rita in both the mental as well as the physical as well as the spiritual, and all of these stages. So I think you discussed that quite extensively in that book as well. So we'll I think probably segue into that a little bit now. So
Yes. One principle that is repeatedly mentioned is the dharma, the samanya dharma, or the ethical principles. These are not just physical actions. They have to be practiced in body, that is physically, practice in the mind, and practice through speech. So manasa vacha kaya. So this is therefore the Shastras repeatedly mention this. So what is at the root of it is, and I think in the book I have discussed a beautiful discussion on this from I think Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, right?
yeah.
Wherein it says dharma is satya and satya is dharma, and they are one and the same. How is it that they are one and the same? Because we have clearly two principles like Satyam Vada Dharmam Chara. I think the Taittiriya says this. They are same in the sense that Dharma is, if I have to phrase it like this, Dharma is Satya put into action, and Satya is Dharma which is put into words. Satya is that which is according to Shastra. What does it mean in according to Shastra? Because Shastra is the pramana for Dharma. So what is according to Shastra is Satya, and action done is Dharma. And in another level, Satya is the speech, Dharma at the level of speech, and Dharma is the Satya at the level of action. And the root of both these is Rita, which is has, as you said, has a very wide meaning as a cosmic order, harmony.
Harmony.
So, and at the individual level, I think it manifests as uh, the seed of the dharma as a thought, as an intuition. I think this is a very deep concept, and it has many shades of its own. And I think I will quote one quote. I think I have not found any better definition. This is a quote I have put in the book. It's from Shatabdani R. Ganesh, and he says,
Yeah,
"The
beautiful
wise,
quote.
yes, the wise understand Rita as a system inherent in this universe, Satya as a manifest reality of that system, and Dharma as the work that is done with firm understanding of the system and its manifestation." So Rita corresponds to inner realization, Satya corresponds to external manifestation, and Dharma corresponds to an action leading to a result. So I think they are three different aspects of the same phenomenon. It's the same principle, but they are just three stages of the principle. They are referred to as three different names.
Then I think also uh, you know I also want to bring in, particularly in this context. I think I'll come to that, but the contextual basis of dharma, I think I wanted to bring that, but we've discussed some of it. Whereas the samanya dharma and the vishesha dharma, which which can change, which can be which is subject to change based on kala, desha, guna, even varna, for example, or even the ashrama, the stage of life in which a person is. But I bring in the aspect of shaucha, because if you remember right, we also wanted to have a separate webinar on shaucha itself, given the this one. So the whole idea of shaucha, or the aspect of hygiene, cleanliness, and all of that, which doesn't seem to be reflected in society now, at least as far as many of our cities are concerned. But Shaucha finds a great, great amount of, there's a lot of reference to Shaucha repeatedly in several of these Shastras as well.
Before I answer about Shaucha, I want to speak a little about Dharma and Samanya Dharma. Because I think that it's very important to understand this. Dharma, as I said, it's not a monolith. We can broadly classify Dharma into Samanya and Vishesha. Samanya is general, which is common. Vishesha is special. That is, this is a kind of an individual based on his or her needs, place in society, their place in spiritual development, their varna, ashrama, etc. So while Samanya Dharma is about ethical principles which is applicable to everybody, irrespective of gender, nationality, race, or whatever it is, but Vishesha Dharma is specific to a person. I think this is one of those features which are very unique to Indian civilization. See, we see the ethical articulation of ethical principles in other religions, other civilizations across the world. But this articulation of Vishesha Dharma, that too in the depth that our acharyas have gone into, is something very unique contribution of our civilization. And Vishesha Dharma is about Desha, it depends upon the time we are living in, the place we are living in, and the, the kind of work we are doing, our Varna, our Ashrama. For example, Vishesha Dharma of a Brahmachari and a Sannyasi and as or a Grihastha is different. A Grihastha has a dharma to fulfill, to pursue dharma, artha, kama, all the three of them. But a sannyasi is to be pursue only the moksha part, right? So this is there is a difference in lifestyle among them. Similarly, there is the question of varna. Varna is based on the temperaments that you have, based on the kind of family you have taken birth into, based on your capabilities. You are capable of doing different things. So your duty is different. The duty of a Kshatriya is different from the duty of a Vaishya. So these are context specific, person specific duties. So with this in the background, to answer your question about Shaucha, yes, it is true that contrary to what we see today around us, our Shastras have always given lot of importance to Swachhata, the concept of Shaucha. And this concept occurs in many levels. It is not just about keeping your house clean or keeping your environment clean. Yes, that is very important aspect of it. The keeping your surroundings clean, keeping the ecology clean or ecology unpolluted, and all those things. But there are also other aspects to it. One is, of course, the physical aspect, but there is internal aspects, the purity in the speech, purity in the thought. And that is why Shaucha is very important part of the Sanatana Dharma principle, the Samanya Dharma principles. I would like to elaborate a bit more, if it's okay. In the Manusmriti, it speaks about different kind of adharmic actions, criminal actions that a person can do, and he classifies it into bodily adharmas and adharmas committed by mind and adharmas committed by speech. The bodily adharma, cheating, and all those things, stealing, etc. Similarly, at the level of the speech, it includes speaking lies, backbiting, gossiping, all those things. At the level of the thought, the adharmas include thinking bad about somebody, thinking to harm somebody, thinking to steal somebody's wealth or somebody's, spouse for that matter. So all these are considered as huge, grave adharma. And Shaucha is directly related to this because purity of the mind implies that our mind is controlled. There is a Indriya Nigraha, the Mano Nigraha. that we do not even think of doing adharma. And shaucha at the level of speech means our speaking, our words are careful, are pleasant, are truthful, most importantly. And the actions, likewise, our actions are pure. We live a healthy dharmic life, healthy ethical life. So shaucha is not just about swachhata. Shaucha is much more than that. And
Absolutely.
there is other concept of shaucha which may be relevant. I won't go into depth. We have this concept of ashaucha in the case of menstruation that I have dealt with my book.
Yeah.
In case of birth and death ashaucha, these are all shaucha discussions at the level of pranic kosha. Contrary to modern understanding, our view is that we are not just the physical body. We have the pancha koshas, the physical body is the annamaya kosha. We have the pranic body, which is the vital airs, and then we have the manas, the and the Anandamaya Kosha. So at the pranic level, these Janana Shocha and all those things are very relevant at the level of the pranas. So the Shaucha is a very huge topic. In
Right.
fact, in the Dharma Shastras, you find a whole sections on these Shauchachara, Shuddhikarana sections. The whole big sections, number of pages written on this. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just brought it in because I think that there were several there were several points that came up about it, and two, we wanted to do something on that, and also it's good that you brought it up because I specifically framed the question like that because I think it's important to understand that shaucha is also a much wider, conceptually is much wider and not just about physical or environmental cleanliness. It's also about the spiritual, mental, physical, the cosmic, environmental, and all of those put together. And both are the mental, speech and all of that. So that is one, this one. And I think the Indriya Nigraha that you've been, repeatedly talking about, there is that in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita also there is that reference to it, uh, and the symbolism of the of Krishna being in the Krishna sitting in the chariot itself as and holding on to the reins of the mind and all of that. So I think the whole Indriya Nigrahana is the whole idea is that for that to happen, it's, for example, quite a lot of times it is being misconstrued as complete abstinence from everything that is important, which it is not. It is actually Indriya Nigrahana is about Viveka, is absolutely about discrimination between what is right and what is wrong. Again, right and wrong are not terms that we use, but I'm using those because there is a lack of the between what is dharma and what is adharma. It's for lack of the whole idea of viveka that is required, discrimination that is required, is what we are talking about when we actually talk about the whole idea of indriya nigrahana and the and what you should be doing and what and the whole purpose and how it helps not just at the level of the spiritual, but also at the level of the physical, the mental, particularly in a digitally connected world where practicing this is of great help.
Yes, definitely. I think among all the Manu lists five important principles as Samanya Dharma: Ahimsa, Satyam, Asteyam, Shaucham, Indriya Nigrahan. I think in today's times, the kind of life we are living in, a consumeristic life, I think the antidote to the ills of consumerism is Indriya Nigraha. Antidote to lot of ills that we are facing today, maybe ecological destruction or lot of crisis of humanity that is facing. Indriya Nigra has a key to tackle this. As you rightly said, Indriya Nigraha is not abstinence. Nigraha means restrainment, control. You control the mind and you control your desires. What does control mean? For example, I see an ice cream and I go and eat an ice cream. That is okay in normal circumstances. But if I have a cold, and then I see an ice cream and I eat an ice cream, then it will lead to further deterioration of health, right? So Indriya Nigraha means knowing when to, leading a kind of knowing when to stop, knowing when to control yourself. Uh, we speak in extremes when we speak about a luxurious life and we speak about a minimalistic or a austere life. Yes, austerity is good, but not everybody is capable of living an austere life. But it is possible to, there is a midway, there is a mid path, there is a mid point between austerity and luxury, and wherein one can live a comfortable life within the means, but at the same time enjoy the life. And for to accomplish this, Indriya Nigraha is very important. That is, I think a lot of people, many times they do it, whether they know about the concept of Indriya Nigraha or not. It's about prioritizing things. I mean, as with the example of this ice cream I gave, I mean we have a lot of desires. We want to do this, we want that, this and that. But when the means are limited, we prioritize our life, what we want to get and what we don't want to get. But this is one aspect. The other aspect is why Indra Nigra is important is it acts as a counter action against any kind of addictions. You know, you keep your mind and the senses in control, then you will never get into addicted to anything. You know, even social media is an addiction. It's not just the beverages and the cigarettes and the drugs, right? So the root of the root cause of um, the addictions is basically lack of self-control among people. And why is this happening? Because parents today are more interested in thinking about whether the child becomes an engineer or a doctor than to make him a responsible human being, right? So they don't care about teaching the children about Indriya Nigraha. They about Indriya Nigraha. They say what they will say, right?
Did you have any
But
issues,
in,
Nitin, when you said so no more civil engineering for me? I'll get into this, or was that, or was your family absolutely okay with what you?
see, I have a way of getting things done on my way, so
Oh,
it's so, I did not have any opposition, and anyway, so
yeah,
coming back
and
to the
on
point.
this subject of Indriya Nigrana, I think another point also is that it's about the senses not controlling you at a more fundamental, at a more spiritual and rather you having control over the senses. I mean, essentially, it is you who needs to be deciding what the senses, where the senses have to go, because where your attention goes, that is, I mean, that is what you that is what you will do. So essentially it's also about ensuring where your attention is, and where you want to focus your attention in, and who is the boss in a very at a very fundamental level. I mean,
Yes, yes, definitely. You put it well.
a
It is about
good friend is quickly typing out. Nitin is doing a more cosmically important aspect of civil engineering, I believe. That's a mouthful that I have, that we have received here.
yeah. So, but it's more easy to say than implement that. Whether we control the senses or the senses control us. And I want to speak a little on that because we are all born with the particular vasanas from our previous lives. The impressions, the samskaras, and we have certain attitudes, certain
Hmm.
desires to which the senses are designed to move out by very definition. So how do we control it? It cannot be developed in a day or two. Some people are by nature dispassionate. By the engage, they are dispassionate towards worldly things, but most of us are not. So the only way out is to develop this kind of sense control to some extent. I'm not saying everybody becomes sannyasi, right? To some extent, from very childhood. This was an essential aspect of a Gurukula teaching. They did not teach the theory aspect. They taught the children the wholesome aspect, and this is something missing today. Uh, for example, I'll take a very straightforward and a controversial example. Just today, I was reading that there has been a discussion about increasing the age of marriage of girls from 18 to 21, and the boys' age is already fixed at 21, right? Now, how did this age fixing happen? It's a very arbitrary fixing of age, right? But consider this: in the US, not just in, even in India, we find a lot of issues of teenage pregnancies, lot of issues of teenage abortions. How is this happening? It is happening because the so-called age fixing is something which is arbitrary. It does not take into account the human impulses, which is natural to, it may be men or women, it may be natural to them. So we are, on one hand, we are artificially fixing up the age of marriage, while the age of consent is something else. And on the second hand, we are not equipping our children to actually deal with these natural human impulses. They are not taught about Indriya Nigraha. They are not taught about being responsible in life. They are not taught about anything, right? So now we have all these issues which were not present in a pre-colonial society. This teenage pregnancies and abortions, etc. So we need to understand that Indriya Nigraha is a very important aspect. It needs to be taught from very childhood. It need to be the Brahmacharya ashrama is designed to, its very purpose is to teach Indriya Nigraha to children, but that is completely missing. In a traditional setup,
Even the, I mean, the whole,
in the ancient society, what used to happen was uh, the boys, they were taught Indriya Nigraha, etc. during their Brahmacharya ashrama during in Gurukula days. Well, the girls, they were given education at home itself, but after they become adult, after they had their first menses, within few years, that is 2 to 3 years, that is by the age of 15 or something, they were married. So there was no need for them to develop a Indriya Nigraha. They would fulfill their natural impulses and desire in a proper marital setup. But now today, the there is no marriage situation. There is no marital institution. The ages have been increased, haphazardly, and then they are not even giving them education of Indriya Nigraha, and then we are expecting that they follow the children follow the commandment of their parents,
I'll
right?
just
In
bring,
a very,
yeah,
yeah.
I'll just bring in a question here. I think one of the questions that's come up is Indriya Nigraha is possible only if an individual aspires to the higher goal in life. I don't actually think that is, I wouldn't agree with that. So, yeah, essentially, I think Indriya Nigraha is something that should be given to everyone, because I think even if you, even to achieve the most fundamental aspects of even a very, very secular kind of life that you want to, when I say secular, it's not the classical definition of the of what
But
yeah, but even to achieve, even to understand, even to have a basic education, I think the whole idea of it is essentially improves focus and other things. There is one other question that I'll quickly slip in, because we have only 20 minutes more. Is that, there is one question, so I'll run this through. One person who's, three people have asked the same question. For someone who wants to understand the core philosophical texts of Hinduism, with the aim of to realize the way and all that, what specific books can one start with? Is there any chronology that needs to be followed? Okay.
okay.
And then one more question I'll slip in, because is that, why is there a misunderstanding that the entire principles you're explaining belongs to one religion, or belongs to one religion? How to break this barrier, which is the principles actually, although I'll ask you to answer that, is that this is not a religion we're talking about. I mean, you cannot classify this as a religion, because this is a dharma, and it was a nameless dharma because it did not require to be named then in the earlier stages. So I don't know if you can remember all the questions, but quite a lot of chat coming up, so I thought I'll quickly slip in
Yeah.
those two questions.
So the first question is, I think the person who asked about Indriya Nigra, I think he has a misunderstanding of what Indriya Nigra is. Indriya Nigraha is not a sannyasa. Indriya Nigraha could be a step to sannyasa, but it need not be. So the thinking that Indriya Nigra is only for those who want to pursue spiritual goal is incorrect.
No, no, I think
I
I
feel
think it was a higher goal. That's a higher goal in life, is what was how the question was framed. But even then, I think
but
the point is that, you know, it's about something that everybody needs to
yes,
inculcate as a habit, rather than as a.
yes, why it is needed is, I'll give a very practical example, right? Uh, Take, for example, when children study for exams, right? A lot of children face this problem of concentration, right? Their mind is going this side, that side, and the mind is a monkey. You know, I remember Adi Shankaracharya, who compares mind to monkey, and I think
Hmm.
in Shivananda Lahiri. So mind is a monkey. It goes everywhere,
And now with
and
the
this is one
internet,
of
it is a drunken monkey now. So
so this is the reason why a child can not concentrate on studying for an exam. So what do you do? So this is a problem of Indriya Nigraha only. This is Indriya Nigraha is not for only
right.
some higher goal or spiritual goal, whatever it is. It is for a everyday, day-to-day issue. The mind, if it is brought under control, then there is a one-pointed concentration, and that should be developed from childhood. There are various ways this can be developed, and meditation could be one way. There could be other ways, but that is the point. Indian Nigra is for relevant for everybody.
Yeah.
And what was the second?
Yeah, the second one was, do you recommend any specific, if you want to start on this path or something, is there a chronology of
Okay.
books that we should start reading or
So
something? And yeah,
I'll just promote myself, and I'll say that please you can start by reading my books,
yeah,
the
Samanya Dharma. Yeah,
Samanya Dharma, as well as my other books like Musings on Hinduism.
using some.
This Musings on Hinduism specifically kind of provides a overview of Hindu philosophy, and then of course for more detailed reading, there are other books. Lot of books are there. If you do a Amazon search, you'll get Essentials of Hinduism. Uh, There is no chronology in this. You can start anywhere. I mean, you just need to start,
Yeah, you need to start. Absolutely.
because from the outside, the Sanatan Dharma, the principles of philosophies may appear like a huge forest. But the only way to grasp the forest is to just enter it from some way. You can just start it with, say, studying Gita. You can start it with, say, reading Ramayana or a Mahabharata and thinking about it. So we underestimate our text. We underestimate our Itihasa Puranas, and most of the people don't read it. Our knowledge of Ramayana Mahabharata is from the serials, unfortunately. But I suggest people to read this text. Take up a
And
translation.
yeah, and one other book that I, strongly recommend, and it helped me, though I did not start with that, is the in Tamil it's called the Devatin Kural, but there's an English version of it. It's a 7-volume book, roughly roughing into 8,000 pages, which is a compendium on the Sanatana Dharma. It's called the Voice of God. I think that is something that most people can, I don't know, I'll type it out as well. The English version is called the Voice of God. I think to a large extent most questions that people have on many of these aspects get covered in a most fantastic this one. So that is,
Yes, I think that is collection of works by Kanchi
yeah,
Acharya, right?
the
Yeah,
Mahapariva, the book,
yeah,
this one, yeah.
yeah. So you can start anywhere, absolutely anywhere, and you just need
And
to
you have
start. There
Swami
is a
Vivekananda's works as well, the complete work
Yes,
if required.
and
All of
there
this.
is a fantastic website called Hindu Wisdom. You just
Mm.
type it in Google, and there you have lot of random articles on Hindu Dharma, various aspect of it. And this is how I started. Just sharing the personal tidbit. When I was an atheist who then discovered Hindu Dharma, and so from being a political Hindu to a practicing Hindu, the journey started with this website. I just happened to accidentally land on the website, and then for next 6 months I was reading the material in the website 2 to 3 hours every day. I mean, just imagine the amount of content in it.
Mm.
So you can absolutely start anywhere. There is no chronology. Just pick up something and start reading. And it doesn't matter. You may not understand everything later. There may be hundreds of questions, and these get clarified. The more you read, it slowly gets clarified. And what was the last question? The third one?
Third one is that the third one was why is it that it looks like all of what we're saying is essentially talking about one religion. This one I quickly framed that as well, saying that we should not be calling this a religion. I think the Kanchi Paramacharya frames that very well. He says, I mean, it's not the Hindu Dharma. It's not this because it did not require a name. It was called Dharma because it pre-existed all other whatever you want to call it. So it doesn't fall under you cannot frame it into that religion category. So I don't see how it is. I think many of the aspects that inform us from what we like to call as Hindu Dharma are something things that can be common to so many people, irrespective of where they belong to or what they do. I think that's but
Yes,
I'll again
yeah, definitely. I would like to say, slightly give a different answer. It's not different. Yes, I agree with you, Ramesh, that Hindu Dharma is not a religion in the sense Christianity is a religion or Islam is a religion. It is not an Abrahamic religion. However, a religion has other definitions. So, in a different definition, in a broader definition, yes, Sanatan Dharma is a religion in a sense. But yes, we are a civilization, and this is our civilization heritage, this is our civilization philosophy and worldview. Because our civilization, by very nature, is universalistic, all our principles are universally applicable. However, we need to realize that the roots of these uh, thoughts, they have a very particular uh, roots. They have a very particular foundation, and their foundation is in Hindu Shastras, in the Shastras of Sanatan Dharma. So I wanted to bring this in before we finish our discussion today. How do we know what is dharma and what is adharma? Here, this is relevant to this question also. In the Apastamba Sutras, it says that dharma and adharma does not come and tell us we are dharma, we are adharma, right? And if you are using purely logic, then it's not possible. Everybody will use logic to their own ends. Everybody, even a murderer, will say that what I did was right. It was right for me, right? And he will give a rational explanation. So that cannot be the basis as well. So what then is the basis to know which action is dharma, which action is adharma? So this is called this pramana. Pramanatva means the sources of valid knowledge. In the Hindu civilization, we have 6 kinds of pramanas, which is pratyaksha, the direct perception, anumana, the inference of rational logic, and then we have shastra or shabda pramana, which is a pramana from a text, or a person, right? Anupalabdhi, and that is not needed now. For dharma and adharma, pratyaksha pramana is not valid. What is dharma? What is
lost you.
adharma?
I think we lost you at the last bit. This one when you were talking about the pramanas, the last bit, Nitin. I think after Shastra Pramana, I think you wanted to mention also Apta and Atma Pramanas also. I think
yes, and they are all part of this Shabda Pramana.
Yeah.
So I
don't
want
know.
to
At
highlight
least
this.
I lost you there, so I just thought.
Okay, you lost me. Okay. Yeah. So what I was saying was, for us, for the knowing what is dharma and adharma, pratyaksha, anumana, and all other pramanas are not useful to us. There is only one pramana, and that is Shastra Pramana.
Correct.
What is this Shastra? So the Manusmriti gives a verse saying, Vedo akhilam dharma moolam. The moola, the root of dharma is in Veda. Veda is Shruti, which is Apaurusheya. It is not a human creation. it is a divine revelation,
Anadi as well.
and it
Yeah.
is, yes,
Yeah.
it is Anadi, yes.
Yeah.
So it is in this Veda which is the Mula of Dharma. What the Shruti says. Then Veda is not just the Samhita, please understand. This is a modern Western construction that Veda is Samhita and others are not Veda. In the tradition, when we speak about Shruti or Veda, it includes the Samhitas, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, and the Upanishads. So whatever is uttered in them, what action we have to do, we should not do. These are all what becomes known as dharma and adharma. What they say we should do is dharma. What they say we should not do becomes adharma, right?
Yeah.
But this is the first step. That is, the Manusmriti gives a very four-stage process of determining what is a
Yeah.
ethical action, what is a dharmic action in a situation. The very first stage is the Veda or Shruti. But these Shruti are very abstract in nature, and we have lost a lot of shakas. So, what is the next? The second stage is Smritis. These are the texts written by our rishis like Manu, Parashara, Yagyavalkya, and we have Dharma Sutras like written by Apastamba, Baudhayana, and many
Baudhayana,
others,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So these Dharma Sutras and the Smriti texts, the rishis wrote them after completely having a knowledge of the Veda. So they kind of distilled the knowledge of Veda and gave these texts of Smritis and Dharma Sutras in the form of Vidhi and Nisheda, in the form of proper guidelines, what we should do, we should not do. For example, in Manusmriti, we have these detailed instructions about what is the duty of a Brahmana, what is the duty of a Kshatriya, what is the duty of a king, what is the duty of a businessman, the Vaishya, what is the duty of a those in service industry like a Shudra. All these details are there. Now, uh, because these are archetypical texts, we need to keep interpreting them based on our requirement.
Hmm.
So the third aspect is the actions of our worthy ancestors. How do we know it? We know it from Itihasa Puranas, like how Rama lived, how Krishna lived, how Yudhishthira lived, how what did Shiva do in the Shiva Purana, or what is Mahavishnu do. So all this a lot of material is there, and our own elders, how did they live? How our acharyas live? Or what they do tell, the instructions that they give. So these forms the third step in contextualizing the Vedic the instructions about dharma. And the fourth is Atma Tripti. What is uh, what we intuitively feel, what feels, what our conscience says, what feels satisfied. Like Socrates used to say, a man who knows what is right will invariably do right. That is, we all have this inner voice which says, even a robber who does the robbing, who robs the house, he steals money. Somewhere deep down, he will be knowing that it is wrong to do. He may listen to it, he may not listen to it, but he will be knowing. So these are the four stages. Doing those actions that 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 makes us happy, that makes us guilt free. That is the fourth stage. So if what action is dharma, what is adharma, there is no other way than the knowing the shastras. Krishna clearly says in Bhagavad Gita that the actions according to shastras is dharma. Opposite of it is adharma. So, using the Vedas, the Smritis, the Itihasa Puranas, and our own and how our ancestors have lived, how our teachers are living, our parents are living, we learn from that and then apply it on our own situation, in our own unique situations. Because no two-person situations is same in life, and ultimately the decision has to be taken by the individual, because the responsibility of the action is also lies with the individual. So
Right.
this the Shastra Pramana is Pramana is taken from the Shastras of Sanatana Dharma. You cannot bring in any, today you cannot bring in Das Capital of Karl Marx and say this is our Shastra Pramana. So that is
Hmm.
not a Vaidika view.
Yeah.
right?
For some, that is
So
also a Shastra. So I think the one question, perhaps we have about 8-9 minutes to go. So is that I think what many people have asked, and that's it's that the difficulty of bringing this into practice. Now, most of us are great at talking about what is important, what needs to be done, what is good, and all that. But are we really practitioners of dharma? So, do we call somebody? How do we call a person dharmic if that person is not actually practicing dharma? So, is a dharmic person a practicing? Do we call somebody who is a practicing person as dharmic, or and dharma itself? I think in some place we also mentioned that the whole idea of dharma is that it needs practice. I mean, without practice, what is dharma without dharma being practiced at all? So that is a question, and then probably have time for one more before we
yeah.
wind up for today.
Yeah, there is a shloka what you say. I think it is in Manusmriti again.
Hmm.
Acharyam paramam dharma or something like
Correct.
the what is practiced is it's not acharyam. It's something else. I'm quoting it wrong. It basically says practice is the highest dharma.
Yeah.
Otherwise, all intellectual knowledge is useless.
Hmm.
However, interestingly, nobody wants to be called a adharmi, right?
Hmm.
And human life by nature is not black and white. There is always shades of gray. There are more than 50 shades of gray. So human life is complicated, and even the worst criminal may have some redeeming qualities, right? And even the most virtuous person may have some demerits in him, right? So instead of you know the point of all this discussion is not to pass on certificates, dharmic certificates
Hmm.
to people, whether this person is dharmic, this person is adharmic. Or instead, what we should do is we need to identify our own, we need to self-introspect. When we study the Shastras, we have different archetypes, different ideals, On one side, we have Rama, on one side, we have Ravana. And one side, we have Yudhishthira, one side, we have this Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana. We need to ask ourselves, what do we want to become? Unfortunately, today the discourse is a lot more skewed. It is very distorted. Today we have people who celebrate Shurpanaka, who celebrate Ravana, and I have seen these social media posts of some of our friends from the left saying that Ravana was a great person because he was such a great brother. He was a pro-women because he was a great brother who went to war to take revenge for insult of Shurpanaka,
Hmm.
whereas the Rama is the villain who harmed a woman like Shurpanaka, and that is complete bizarre. That is complete nonsense. It completely misses the whole plot of the Ramayana.
All part of
It completely misses that fact that Ravana was a serial rapist. He raped hundreds of women,
Absolutely. I think
and
that comes up in this one itself, and the whole idea was that the whole idea that he did not harm Sita was not because of any great dharmic quality, but rather I think he confesses to his own minister, where he says only because he earned that curse from Brahma when he misbehaved with Punjikasthala, who was born again as Anjana Devi of this one and all that. So
yes,
yeah.
definitely. So Ravana was a serial rapist, and I don't know how one can uphold him as a uh, ethical man, right? And on the other hand, the Shurpanaka episode is the text is very clear. Shurpanaka wants to kill Sita. She
Hmm.
tries to kill Sita. It is
That
only because she tried to kill Sita, she was punished. It was a punishment. And the right punishment should have been to actually kill Shurpanaka. But because of compassion, he left her. However, it was clearly punishment. So, are we saying that Rama should have, what kind of virtues do we want to uphold by, portraying Shurpanakha as a victim or Ravana as an ideal man.
Mm.
So we need to be very careful in what lessons we learn. So the texts have all the kinds of shades in their characters, especially the Mahabharata has this, because it wants to teach us the different shades of psychology, the different shades of human thinking, human personality that is in the real universe, right? So, I would suggest that people have to be thinking, instead of giving out certificates to individual people, we need to be mature and
I think, yeah.
consider how we can improve our life. How can we sync our life to these ideals? I mean, regarding the question how it is difficult to practice, I think of course, it is difficult to practice. If it were so easy, then everybody would have done, and we did not need to have this webinar today. So there is no, but at the same time, there is no, there is no benchmark of this is perfect, that is perfect. Yes,
Yeah.
there could be a benchmark in some sense, in a workable sense. Like the Ramayana opens with Valmiki asking, "Who is the Maryada Purushottam? Who is Dharma Vigraha?" The
Mm.
uh, Rama is described as Dharma Vigraha, the very personification of Dharma. That could be an ideal, yes, but we have to keep working upon ourselves. There is no way other than this. We have to start somewhere. We have to try to change our life, try to implement in our life to the best of our ability.
Yeah. So, okay. So, Nitin, it's been wonderful. I think we have a couple of minutes. I think you're coming up with two more books, right? I think one of the advantages of not constructing buildings is that you can construct narratives now. So,
Yes,
yeah.
my next book is a English commentary on Ishavasya Upanishad,
Okay.
and the manuscript is ready, and hopefully it will be out in 2-3 months. I mean, based on how the lockdown and Corona is there,
Mm.
situation is there. So it's ready, and yes, other than that, I have few more projects in line. I recently I signed a book. I'm yet to sign it, but the contract. But we have come to understanding that I'll be working on a book on Vedanta for children.
Mm.
So writing a book on a very basic concepts of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta for sake of teenagers.
Mm.
Between 10 and 20.
Mm.
Yeah. So these, and there are few more projects. I'm trying to convert my writings on the issue of sati into a book, and
Right.
yeah, and other things like that.
I
Yeah.
think that's another important thing that needs to be although Meenakshi Jain has done a fabulous job on that. I think it's also,
But
yeah.
my approach is different from her. She has done a
Mm.
fantastic job,
Mm.
but it's a analysis of the historical prevalence of the practice.
Correct.
But what I'll be doing is the analysis of the practice itself from a
Mm.
dharmic perspective, because the current narrative is sati is a inhuman practice. It is a practice which is adharmic. It is a criminal practice, and so I would be analyzing whether these allegations are correct. What does the Shastras itself says about what sati is,
And,
or
and,
how
and
it should be
yeah,
practiced?
and absolutely about the numbers also. I think people who think that it's generally the this one that it was a social evil and all that. That's what we study in our history textbooks. Whereas it is not a socially endorsed or practiced evil, but rather the narrative was made as such, in the sense that it was, I mean, you simply have to go to the Mahabharata to see the kind of advice that Madri gets when she says she wants to follow Pandu, this one. She's actually repeatedly they tell her don't do it, and then they say
But
your responsibility is first to your child, and then that. It's only when she says there is no way I will, I've been primarily responsible for his death, and therefore I see no other way to do it, is only then that this one that
yes,
yeah.
definitely.
So that is,
So
yeah, and I think that will be an
there
important
yes, there has
book
always
that'll
been
come out. Yeah.
the mechanism that to prevent women from committing sati. However, the position of sati itself in the Shastras is not this assertion that is a evil, religious evil, social evil needs to be reassessed, and that is what I would be doing.
Nitin is also frozen, so your screen also froze, telling us that we are running out of time, perhaps. So yeah, so we have run out of time. I want to take this opportunity to thank Nitin on behalf of We Lead, VIS, SVM, and all that, and also from personal point of view. We'll do more such sessions. We'll obviously also talk offline. I also want to thank all the participants. A recording of this would obviously be shared. We will edit it slightly and then post it. So you might want to give us a little 1 week or something before link to that would be shared with all of you. Thank you so much and have a great weekend. And